This week's guest is so good, I wish there was an 800 number to call him anytime I had questions about company building. Ray Reich is the person you want to know if you have questions about running a business with high discipline, high efficiency, high reliability. In this CarCast, we cover growth, profit, customer acquisition, churn, and the 5 metrics you need to know in order to be an exceptional operator, an exceptional CEO. The episode is less than 19 minutes, so it's full of great insights. You're going to love it. I guarantee it. And if you're not one of the 6 million viewers who catch this CarCast everywhere it's indicated, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube down here, because that is the best way to stay on top of these videos. As soon as they get published, let's listen in. The rule of 40, the CAC ratio, LTV over CAC, FCF, NOR. What do all these terms mean? Well, if you're a CEO, GM, or an entrepreneur, and you want to get a clear and simple explanation for all of this, this CarCast is for you. Our guest puts the R in GDR. This joke will make a lot of sense by the end of the segment, I promise. Our guest also a founding member of the SaaS Metrics Standards Board. His team runs the industry's largest SaaS benchmarking index. That's 18,000 unique SaaS companies, over 500,000 data points. He is also the host of the SaaS Talk podcast, which he runs with one of my good friends, Dave Kellogg, and they debate all types of issues around capital, operation, customer efficiencies. Here, think about customer acquisition, retention, expansion, all the stuff you need to know. Today, our guest is Ray Reich. Ray, thank you so much for joining the CarCast today.
Bruno, thank you so much. And since I was an old-time fan of Car Talk, when I heard a CarCast, I'm like, I got to be on it. Thank you, Bruno.
Well, and you look good. You definitely fit the format. You got the sunglasses, and you're in your car, so definitely you're a pro at this. So, and you've been around the block. You're a senior revenue leader across a wide range of companies, Fortune 500, hyper-growth VC, early stage startups and SaaS companies, senior executive in 5 companies with successful exits. So there's a lot that we can talk about here. But today, in the true formula of the CarCast, we focus on what matters, and we demystify the complex for the community. So today we're going to cover the key issues that face SaaS businesses in 2024, the key metrics every executive needs to know that they can't afford to ignore. So we're going to start at the top before we dive into those topics. What is your story?
I've been in subscription software businesses for over 30 years. And people are going to say, hell, no way, because SaaS only started in late 99, 2000. But I was at the division of GE, called GE Information Services. We were the world's largest provider of time sharing. What is time sharing? Multi-tenant architected applications hosted on a mainframe, accessible via our global private network, paid for on a subscription plus usage basis. SaaS before SaaS, right? I mean, Apple Computer ran their entire distribution and dealer network on our hosted application. So that was my story. And then I was lucky enough to come out, join Netscape, where I headed up the e-commerce group. And that was kind of the start of my Silicon Valley experience.
And so you were at SaaS before it had a name, and then you went on and started Benchmarkit. So what is the company? And I guess, how was it born?
At GE, they taught us that every decision had to be backed up with 2 things: numbers and metrics, and critical thought. So whenever I went into an early stage company here that was VC backed, it was really hard to find benchmarks, which are how does my metrics compare to our like company peer group, that were timely, relevant, and contextual. Yeah, I would look at the old Pacific Crest and KeyBank, SaaS Capital had some metrics, but not only were they often 6, 12, 18 months old, the hardest part was, I'm in a 5 million ARR company with a 50K ACV product selling to the marketing organization. What's the comparable metric benchmarks for me? They weren't available. So we decided to go ahead with the audacious goal of building the largest and broadest benchmarking index, which we started 3 years ago. And we did it in partnership with great companies like Gainsight, Exactly, Sage Intacct, et cetera. So the way we've collected all this data is through a partnership network.
That's outstanding. You're timely, relevant, and contextual. Those are really key values. I think about all the CEOs that I know. Being a CEO is a lonely job. And so you want to make sure that you're hitting the right benchmarks and that you're at the top of the group. And it's never really easy to know, particularly in your category. And there's also another problem, which is there are lots and lots of things you could measure, right? And so what I want to start us off with is talk about the 5 metrics that executives, rather SaaS executives or executives running a GM business at any large company, what can't they afford to ignore? What are the top 5 that they must be very informed about?
I'm going to answer that with a framework that we had to develop to answer that question. Because if you think of venture-backed early-stage companies, there's 4 things we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure we have great capital efficiency, that we provide return on capital to our investors. Operational efficiency. Are we doing things efficiently, which can generate free cash flow? And it's around customer acquisition efficacy, customer retention efficacy, and customer expansion efficacy. So I took those 5 pillars of enterprise value creation, Bruno, and then I looked at where there was overlap. And where there's overlap are the top 5 metrics. Number 1, rule of 40. And the rule of 40 is so important because it measures growth and the free cash flow that you're throwing off from that growth. So metric number 1. Metric number 2, CAC ratio. To generate $1 of ARR, whether that's new ARR from new customers or expansion, how much sales and marketing investment do I need to make? That's really important because if an investor gives me $30 million more, I want to be able to analytically and predictably say I'm going to generate X dollars of new ARR with that. Number 3, once I bring a customer in, can I retain them and the associated ARR? That's why I love gross revenue retention. But then you got to look at, can I grow those customers? And that's net revenue retention, right? I keep 86% of my ARR year over year. I have 25% expansion, so that gives me 111% net revenue retention. And then last of all, and it's a compound metric, but it's an important one to investors, and that's what's the customer lifetime value of my customer? So that looks at things like a gross margin adjusted, average revenue per account, and compare that to my customer acquisition cost. That's the CLTV to CAC ratio. Now, as operators, we need to look at the component parts of that. My retention rate, my customer acquisition cost, the gross margin of my product delivery. So as an operator, I'm going to look at 3 to 5 metrics that drive CLTV to CAC.
So Ray, beyond the metrics, you also talked about the 5 dimensions that any business needs to be aware of what they're driving to. Can you recap those again?
And it's those 5 pillars of enterprise value creation. Number 1, capital efficiency. If I'm investing 20 million, 30 million into building a business, how much ARR do you get in return? So capital efficiency. Operational efficiency. How efficiently can I deliver that product to my customers? Those are things like gross margin, sales and marketing as a percentage of revenue, R&D as a percentage of revenue. So second is operational efficiency. 3 is customer acquisition efficacy. How efficiently can I bring on new customers and the associated ARR? Then there's customer retention efficacy. How effectively and efficiently can I retain my customers? And the 5th is customer expansion efficacy. How effectively and efficiently can I grow my existing customer base? Those are the 5 pillars of enterprise value creation.
So very important framework for anyone running a business to follow, because you're going to be tempted to measure lots of different things. And we talked about the 5 key metrics, but they're attached to this framework. Now, one of the things that you talk about on your podcast is often people use the names of the metrics, but they might not use the same definitions, and then it's just run into those issues where, we're talking about different things. So I want to make sure we center on at least one thing, and I'm going to go Warren Buffett on you, right? For people who don't know this about Warren Buffett, he asks people to prioritize your top 10 priorities, and it tells you now forget 2 through 10. Basically, what is the most important thing? So if there was one that you need to be adamant as a CEO or GM of a business to make sure it's well understood and well defined, what would be the most important one?
I'm going to say rule of 40. And the reason I'm going to say rule of 40, and by the way, it's stage appropriate, right? Rule of 40 becomes much more important when you're 10 million ARR and above, but it combines 2 really important metrics. Growth. Growth is the number 1 factor in enterprise value to revenue multiples. On an R squared factor, which measures the level of correlation of one variable to another variable, it's like 0.40. R squared can be from 0 to 1.0. So 0.40 of the correlation enterprise value to revenue multiples is growth. So rule 40 includes growth and includes one other variable, your operating profitability, typically measured as free cash flow margin.
Yeah.
So if you take your growth rate plus free cash flow margin, that should be 40 or larger. Now, some people will say, well, growth is more important than operating profitability. That's why Bessemer Ventures just came up with the rule of X, which basically says growth is 2 to 3 times more important than free cash flow. But rule of 40 is easy. So growth plus free cash flow margin, 40 or above.
I love what you did there, because you gave me an answer with 2 different metrics. So you kind of got around the defining it with one, but what's great here again is the power of the framework that you're using is what are the key components of your business? How do you think about it as a leader? It tempts me to ask you another question now. If I thought about the second most important one, then which one would you pick?
We all have our biases, right? Mine is the second one. It's the CAC ratio, customer acquisition cost ratio. And simply what it measures for a recurring revenue business is how much sales and marketing investment do I need to make to generate $1 of new ARR. The benchmark over the entire SaaS industry is $1.54 of sales and marketing investment is required at median to generate $1 of ARR. Now, Bruno, I'm going to pull the trick on you again. That's new ARR defined as new customer ARR plus existing customer expansion ARR. That's better known as the blended CAC ratio. But if you really want to get specific as a CEO or a CFO in a SaaS company, you look at new CAC ratio and you look at expansion CAC ratio. New CAC ratio measures how much sales and marketing investment is required to generate $1 of new ARR from new logo customers. And conversely, expansion CAC ratio says how much sales and marketing investment, including customer success, do I need to make to generate $1 of expansion ARR from my existing customers?
And what's at the heart of this question is proving that it is cheaper, supposedly, to sell more to an existing customer and being able to kind of provide a framework for thinking about the difference. Now, I didn't prepare you to this question, but I always think about churn, because it's often something that surprises organizations where they think about the front end of the problem, but then they discover maybe with a new product, a new condition, an incredible amount of churn. So how much do you look at churn when you're running your business?
You can look at churn on a logo basis. 14% of my customers churned last year. Or you can look at it on a annual recurring revenue basis. Oh, my 10 million, 14% churned. Now I flip it. I like gross revenue retention, and it's just the inverse of churn. So if I had 10 million of ARR and I have a 86% gross revenue retention, that says 8.6 million of that 10 million from last year is still here this year. If I flipped it, it's a 14% churn rate, right? But I really like to do it on what percentage of revenue do I retain year over year.
So there you have it. We've covered growth, profit, customer acquisition, and the concept of churn. I wish there was a 1-800 Ray Reich number that I could just call if I have any questions like this. But luckily, you have this amazing podcast. I'm going to put the link down here so people can sign up and listen to it. You have an incredible website, incredible business. I really hope people are going to reach out to you and through this podcast, discover you and the work that you do. Thanks so much for what you do with the community. Where should people find you?
Well, thank you for highlighting some of the things we do to really fulfill our mission of helping SaaS operators, founders, make better metrics informed and benchmark validated decisions. SaaS Talk with the Metrics Brothers. That's the podcast that Dave Kellogg, one of the OGs of SaaS Metrics, him and I do it together. The second podcast is my podcast called Metrics That Measure Up, where we've been lucky enough to have a lot of the amazing founders and CEOs of companies from LinkedIn, DocuSign, Clary, Gainsight, share how they use metrics and benchmarks to guide their journey and help them drive decisions. So there's 2 podcasts I'd highly recommend. And then every day, I've made a commitment to both myself and to the industry. I'm going to do a LinkedIn post about metrics and benchmarks every day. So you follow me at Ray Reich at LinkedIn. That's an amazing way to both follow what I'm trying to share. But if you reach out to me with a direct message, I will guarantee everyone on this podcast, you will get a response for me. You get a response within 24 hours.
Thanks for everything you do. And for everybody else, I will see you next week.
Thanks, Bruno.